In this video, we're going to be talking about the anatomy and functions of the internal structures in the brain. Also note that this is video number 2. So, if we were to look at a lateral point of view for the brain, it would be something like this. This is the inside of the brain. In the previous video, we talked about the parts of the cerebrum, and we talked about the purpose of the cerebellum, but we're not entirely done. Hence, there are more parts that we still need to learn about. So first, to start off with the biggest part, which is the cerebrum over here. So we talked about the cerebrum. It handles the motor and sensory skills, helps control the body, and involves executive planning and high order thinking. So when going down, we see there's this little gap over here known as the corpus callosum. This corpus callosum is a part of the brain that allows the both hemispheres of the brain to connect and be able to communicate to each other, hence send messages from one part of the brain to the other part of the brain. In this space over here is the thalamus. The thalamus it's full of synapses. If you have seen our neurons video, you would know that synapses are the gaps between each neuron, and the chemical messages are sent out through the synapses and are met by the dendrites of the other neuron. Basically, this is full of the synapses, and it receives these chemical messages from the nerves from all over the body, or the peripheral nervous system. It interprets and sends these nerves to the places where they are needed. For example, if we touch something, that nerve will send a signal which will go to the sensory cortex. So basically, you can think of the thalamus acting like a telephone station, a newspaper station. It just gets the messages from one part to the other part. You can think of it like today's social media. So next, under the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Although it's very small, it's a pretty important part of the brain. The hypothalamus helps regulate body temperature, water electrolyte balance, hunger, growth, etc. Here, it allows the signals to be sent throughout the body. The spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system, gets the messages to the brain. But for those messages, once they're received and once the brain is able to compute and understand it, it'll send a different kind of message in order on how to react to that. And a way to be able to send it is through the hypothalamus. It allows the brain to be able to send messages throughout all over the body. An extension of the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. Basically, the pituitary gland creates hormones, and through the hormones, it takes these messages the brain are sending and sends them to all over the body. So now that we've talked about that, we're going to move on to the pineal gland. So basically, the pineal gland, whenever you're tired, it releases a hormone known as melatonin. This allows us to feel sleepy. However, for the pineal gland to produce more melatonin, you need to be in a dark environment. Hence the reason why we feel more sleepy at nighttime than at daytime. Now we're going to be moving on to the brainstem. The brainstem can be split into 3 parts, that being the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So let's start at the beginning. The midbrain is on top of the brainstem and allows a passage for info to flow in the brain and the spinal cord. It also helps with vision, hearing, and voluntary muscle movement. Next is the pons. It acts like a communication place for the motor cortex, sensory cortex, and the cerebellum to be able to communicate with each other and determine how we're going to move based on the information that the nerves are getting. And lastly is the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata connects the brain to the spinal cord and controls the involuntary things. Notice that involuntary are smooth muscles, like organs. And it helps regulate the heartbeat, blood pressure, etc. And if you're wondering what the motor cortex, the sensory cortex, and the cerebellum does, I'll summarize that for you. So the cerebellum coordinates movements. The motor cortex helps us move, and the sensory cortex processes and interprets the sensory information that we're getting in our nerves. This is all about the internal structures of the brain.